Thank you. I am tempted to begin my little talk tonight because it crossed my mind while I was sitting there listening to my predecessors. I'm tempted to begin with what will probably be a mangled quote from Machiavelli. Good laws make good arms. No, good arms make good laws. See, I knew I would get it wrong. Therefore, he's talking about what he's going to write about. I will dispense with talking about the laws and talk about the arms. See? A successful outcome for liberty in the world today depends entirely on the survival of the American Republic. When the American Republic falls, there will be no hope for liberty. So, everything we look at in the world should be thought of from only one perspective. And it really has nothing to do with what Putin is like or anybody else who might be our adversary is like. And that's what I find kind of interesting as people try to talk about what's the purpose of the Ukraine, what's going on in the Ukraine, why did he move on the Ukraine, and so forth and so on. I remember, though it hasn't crossed my mind in quite a long time, when the whole business with the changes in the Soviet Union and all that were happening, I wrote an article. I think it was published, actually, in the National Interest, Irving Kristol's magazine, but I'm not entirely sure because I haven't thought of it in a long time. And in that article, I speculated on the likelihood that what was going on in the communist world was a feigned retreat. See? And that thought has never left my mind. I don't look at the world in terms of just personalities and this and that. I look at the world in terms of geostrategy. What is the real aim of everything that's going on? It is, by the way, one of the ways in which I think one of Napoleon's famous opponents realized how you have to defeat him, because you have to figure out what he's really up to. He was always doing things so that you would get distracted from his main objective. But right now, the thing that I find most startling about the way Americans, whether it's talking about the Ukraine or anything else, are dealing with the world, is that they actually think that, yes, there's a war going on. And Americans actually think that the war is going on somewhere else. And I think that's the only reason that Russia moved into the Ukraine. See? Because we need to think that the war is taking place somewhere else. There is no real war taking place somewhere else. The only war taking place is the war being waged against the United States, and most especially not its government, but its people. When are we going to wake up? And that's why I would have to say, it never occurred to me to like Putin, dislike Putin. I really don't care very much about Putin. And I'm not entirely sure that he's going to turn out to be terribly important in the world unless we let America fall. Because when America falls, it all goes away. And if I'm right, and it was a feigned retreat, and it's always been nibbling at the back of my mind when I analyze events, and I would have to tell you in the course of the last decade, it more and more looks like it. Now, if Putin is one of the artifacts of that feigned retreat, then I would have to regard his maneuvers as part of the overall war that never ended between the United States and the communist powers. Why ever did we think that it did? See? We should have understood that everything going on was a continuation of the war by other means. By means that I think they understood, especially the communist Chinese. See, I think that what is going on is more informed by the strategic judgments of the communist Chinese than by Putin's strategic judgments. Because the communist Chinese have been forever, as far as I can tell, masters of the war that understands that victory is achieved by the indirect approach. Right? Victory is achieved by indirection, by doing and saying things that keep your enemy's eye off the ball, even when they have every reason to see it because it's standing right in front of them. We have just come out of the COVID era. We're not really out of it, obviously. It's just a pause. What was the chief characteristic of the COVID era? In my mind, the chief characteristic was that it was a blow against the United States, landed by who? Landed by the Chinese. Not entirely what you would have thought of as the first crippling blow waged against the United States. Now, I say that advisedly because we were obviously struck by another blow. But I am never sure in my own mind whether that blow was a strategic wake-up call or a spiritual one. I think, given my own perspective, I tend to think the latter, and what I'm talking about is 9/11. But one of the things that makes me think that in a worldly sense no opportunity goes unexploited by the enemies of the United States is that 9/11 was one of those happenings that actually prepared the way for what we are now witnessing. And what are we now witnessing? And here's where I think I would part company a little bit, and it's the reason why I refuse to be preoccupied with Putin or the Ukraine. I am only preoccupied with the imminent failure of the constitutional republic here in the United States. And I believe that unless the people of this country galvanize their own understanding and find a way to make use of existing mechanisms to restore the republic. See, a lot of people think, well, let's get guns and rise up and so forth. A civil war destroys the republic. Any kind of war of that kind will destroy our republic. At this present moment, that is true because the national government of the United States is in the hands, as was admirably pointed out in the talks we have here today, but you've got to follow through on what you point out. The national government of the United States is in the hands of enemies of the American Republic. People who don't believe in the Declaration of Independence. They don't believe in the Constitution. They don't believe in government of, by, and for the people. They believe, as all of the totalitarians did, the fascists and the Nazis and the various forms of communism, they all believe that the people are nothing and that only a vanguard leadership, an enlightened leadership, a leadership endowed with enough power to cow the people, that is everything. And I think that's what we're witnessing. Now, I have to tell you, that's diametrically opposed to what we are supposed to be in the United States. And yet we are now seeing by every indicator that the Biden administration is committed to a view that intends to bring the republic down and make the Constitution a dead letter. And the question I'd have to ask everybody, how do we fight that battle? And I could be convinced, but I'm not. How do we fight the battle to preserve the republic? By sending $40 billion to the Ukraine. I know that when we were a big, powerful country and reasonably sure of ourselves, you could make the argument that fighting the war somewhere else was actually a way of preserving our ability to keep the peace and maintain the strength of the United States at home. But telling me that by fighting a war in the Ukraine, we're going to win what is effectively a civil war in the United States does not make sense. By going over there, we will not win the battle over here. And the answer is really, the problem is, because, yeah, some people are talking as if Putin is some kind of stuff. I don't know where they get this. But I do believe that if you sit back and analyze what he has been purporting to be, the question that occurs to me over the last few years is, well, if he's purporting to be X, why did we never really test him to see if he is really X. The most important thing I would test, if I had the chance, is Putin's professed Christianity. You can criticize it all you like, but he's been making a pretty good show of it. And in addition to everything else, I know, yes, there's persecution and repression of various and assorted non-Russian Orthodox, but we do know, don't we, that throughout the history of the Russian Orthodox Church, it was really verboten in Russia, right? For anybody to be anything other than a Russian Orthodox. That's not something new. That's something that is shades of the Tsarist Russia. That is something that comes from identifying the Russian Orthodox Church as, in a way, the heart and soul of the Tsarist Empire. And why would you need to do that? Because the Tsarist Empire is an imperialistic empire cobbled together among different parts in which it is hard to identify exactly what is the ground, the common ground, the unifying theme of all their existence. What other country has that trouble? We do. And what is the main strategy being used against the United States? Exploiting the fact that we are a nation of nations, a people of many peoples. That in that reflects, and that a fact, I think, is kind of reminds you of what really the Tsarist Empire was and the USSR was and what the efforts that had to be made to take that panoply of differences and give them some idea of common ground. Now, in Russia, that idea of common ground was supposed to be ideological, the communism and so forth. But you and I both know that in every period of the existence of the USSR, other things were going on under the rubric of communism that were intended to mollify, pacify, satisfy, and give a sense of empowerment to this or that leadership group that represented one of the various identities in that particular empire. What are we doing now in the United States? See, I think that we ought to think about the fact that people who have confronted that, and by the way, it's not only the Soviet Union. We have the tendency, because a lot of people don't read Chinese history, to think that China is some kind of monolithic state. Not really. It's a state that had serious changes of regime, hither and thither and yon, in which, depending on what kind of background the rulers had, everybody else was going to suffer a kick in the neck. And they did so at various times in Chinese history. That still continues, as we know, with the Uyghurs, among others, and it's an ongoing feature. See? Is it just a coincidence? Here you have, in the world, a contest between three major powers, all of whom represent, to some extent, the effort to cobble together among the differences that characterize our humanity, a nation that reflects the commitment to common humanity. And I look at that and I say to myself, well, we were winning that particular battle, hands down, flat out, until the occupation of the White House by the alleged President Biden, alleged because the Supreme Court refused to look at the mountains of evidence that have since, that were there at the time, some of them, that have since come to light. I think anybody who can see 2,000 Mules or listen to some of the various folks who have spent a lot of their time looking at this, like Seth Keshel and others, and then come to the conclusion, oh, no, it was a clean election. And some people will say, well, Alan, weren't you a Republican? And so forth and so on. I say, well, yeah, I'm a Republican who has enough experience with the Republican Party to tell you flat out that I believe part of the reason we had this whole fiction going on, nothing's going on here. Move along now. Nothing's happening. That was the best election I've ever seen, coming from Republican mouths. Why did we see that? Because We think that we're talking about an election that was stolen by the Democrats, but I think what has come to the fore now that we're really paying attention, and what some of us felt because we felt it in the arena while things were going on, is that what is really going on in America has devolved. And I've said this now for years. We don't have a two-party system. We have a one-faction system operating in its own interests, conspiring together in order to use the facade of a government of, by, and for the people in order to legitimate their power, which is now being progressively more and more abused to the detriment of any real self-government. And 2020, in the election in 2020, we're kind of the crisis. And we are now experiencing the aftermath of that crisis because the collusion of the two parties prevented what I think would have been a more vigorous response had the Republican Party really been in touch with its own grassroots. But that wasn't the case then. And I would have to say, it's not the case now, I don't think. I think they are, all of them, still paying lip service. That doesn't mean that the people who've been working hard at the grassroots have been paying lip service, but they have. And what are the other characteristics, aside from the fact that we see that the basic premise of our national unity is being cast aside? What is the basic premise of American national unity? That the Republic exists with a vocation for humanity. It's not our wealth. It's not our tremendous economic success and our technology and so forth and so on. These are not the thing that grounds us, and that when other people have come to the country from all different parts of the world, give them some basis for identifying with the nation as something that is a reflection of their good, an offer of dignity to everyone who comes. What are they trying most hard to destroy? The true story of what we did, starting with the founding itself. What was raised up at the time of the founding in the United States would have been, in the Declaration of Independence, a complaint about how the king has been violating all the elements of the Magna Carta. All the rights of Englishmen have been violated. They wrote pamphlets like that for quite a while. But by the time you get to the Declaration of Independence, they have, in the fashion of, Enlightenment humanism, they, I think, had become a lot of the key leaders in America, deeply committed to the idea that right and justice is not just something that applies to this group or that group based on some accommodation worked out amongst themselves. I think that what they did was to move away from that during the course of their response to Enlightenment thinking. But what radically modified the thinking that was going on in France, in England, other places, in the United States? What radically modified it was that the people we're dealing with in the United States are people who not only professed to be believers in Jesus Christ, but who believed that that belief had to be reflected in every aspect of a society's existence. And though we forget it, the famous words of the Declaration are about that decision. And it's a decision that was not made contrary to the lies that are told with the critical race theorists and all of these people. They lie about the history of this country. All and everything that made progress toward a more comprehensive understanding of the application of right and justice on which America was founded, every last bit of it depended on the words of the Declaration of Independence, on the fact that when people went out to fight for the United States, they were fighting for something that was not just about the relationship of white people to their king in England. It was about the relationship of human beings to their God in heaven. And the fact that every claim of dignity has to be rooted in the fact that that dignity does not come from human choice and decision. It comes from God. Now, in the competition between China and so forth and so on, though they talked in China about the mandate of heaven, guess who that mandate did not go to? It did not go to ordinary folks. Let's not fool ourselves. The mandate of heaven was a burden on the one or the ones chosen by heaven to be elevated above all the rest. That's why communist China, wonderful, and in its background, logical candidate for the kind of pseudo-communism they practice there. I say pseudo because I think it's a kind of false ideological understanding reflecting a true commitment to the actual Chinese heritage, which is brutal rule by the few, in which, in point of fact, the mass of the people are as nothing. I remember going through a back and forth with a fellow who was from China. He got interested in my blog, and we got into what turned into a long-running conversation because I kept talking about the intrinsic worth of each and every human being. And he finally fessed up that he didn't believe that each and every human being had any intrinsic worth. There's no intrinsic worth to humanity. And if you understand the Marxist ideology, you understand that that's one of the basic premises of Marxist ideology. There is no intrinsic worth. Worth is a function of power. And that's why the only thing that matters is power. And though the ideologues of communism always talk about power to the people, look at any communist country. And the end result in all of them is not power to the people. It is power to some people and powerlessness to all the rest. The reason we led the parade in terms of drawing people from all parts of the world, not to come here under duress, not to come here looking just for this, that, and the other thing, help from the government and so forth and so on. We're getting into that now, but not in the past. What they were drawn by was the promise which they were hearing was actually fulfilled. That they could come and make their way, and that even though they would find, as we always do, people who didn't know them would treat them with diffidence, some of them might be against them, and so forth and so on, but there was an appeal to law, there was an appeal to an understanding of right and justice, and there would be Americans everywhere they went who would answer that appeal to come to the aid of people exactly like themselves, looking for the dignity that nobody had ever found, except they came to the United States. There has not been a regime ever before in the history of the world that invited the whole world to come in, admitted them, and then fought to guarantee dignity for all of them. And I don't care what they say about slavery. The fact that it was fought against and defeated was a function of that high standard and the truth that Americans were deeply committed to it. And I say on both sides, actually, because this is an aspect of the war we forget. A lot of the people who fought for the South didn't own slaves. And as Thomas Jefferson himself pointed out, the overall impact of slavery wasn't very good for people whose only offer for their well-being was labor. Right? Because what does a slave state do? It sort of lowers the price of labor. Because you got people who are essentially working all the time for room and board and very little else, unless you become particularly fond of some individual. That does not help the people who are out there working in fact, and it's part of the reason, by the way, that despite superior law, in my opinion, and despite, in some ways, well, more than one way, superior generalship, the South lost the Civil War because it couldn't keep up with the dynamism of a non-slave economy. They couldn't do it. It's the same reason, by the way, that in various ways the communist regimes couldn't keep up, the Nazi regime couldn't keep up, the fascist regime couldn't keep up. You can be all excited about the prospect of production and so forth and so on, but until you split the atom and release the energy of individual opportunity, individual commitment, individual care and feeding of the economic prospects of a country, you will not get the explosion, almost nuclear, of results that the United States got in the course of its existence. This is the war that's going on, y'all. And in one sense, we had already won the war. And that's why I guess I'm not terribly preoccupied with Putin. I'm interested in his profession of Christianity because I believe we should have challenged him on that. And I don't mean call him names and say, you're no Christian, you're an ex-communist, I know that you're not a Christian person. Sorry. Christianity is a religion in which, Saul, who became Paul, who became the preeminent expositor of the teachings of Jesus Christ, right? We all know Paul is the one who kind of got the most attention and is the most read and everything like that. But he started out as a bad guy, persecuting Christians, rounding them up, killing Christians, and so forth and so on. A Christian person isn't going to look at Putin and say, he can't be, he must still be a communist, he must still be all that he was. No, you got to test it. Now, I'm not saying he is, because given my sense of the real politic that's going on tomorrow, I kind of doubt it. I assume that the leaders of these great powers have the same ambition that we must have. See, we can't escape it, y'all. Why can't we escape it? Because we are a nation of nations. If we're going to hold ourselves together, we're going to hold ourselves together on that basis. And by the way, that's not because of the imperialism of the United States. These people on the left and all these purblind ideologues don't get it. See? They don't get it. It is not because of what comes or what the United States does and what it has been imposing on people and all of this. That's not what's going on. It is a kind of imperialism, but it is the imperialism of the kingdom of God, the only kingdom known in the world that actually, openly, clearly expresses an understanding of the relationship between God and humanity that puts equal worth on the existence of every last human life until the one who has been endowed with that life proves it to be otherwise. And you know that was the premise of our justice in this country. Are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. What we forget to teach about the Declaration, of course, is that an unalienable right is not the freedom simply to do something. A matter of fact, we probably shouldn't use the word freedom when we are talking about it. It's a decision, yes. It's the result of a use of freedom to make a choice. But a God-endowed unalienable right is actually a responsibility, an obligation. You get to choose to accept that obligation or throw it away. That's why we talk about freedom. We do have choices. But when we make the choice against right according to the endowment of God, we step away from justice. We step away from the common ground, and we begin to walk a path that does not show God's respect for all humanity. See? And that's what we've been doing. That's why I can't get preoccupied with Putin. This country is not going to fall because of Putin. In my opinion, what's happening in the Ukraine, and I don't mean any disparagement, suffering, death is going on. But I think that our leaders always have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, their first priority, and Donald Trump was always this way. It's one of the reasons I, overcame some misgivings. And as I watched him operate, I said, well, this guy at least knows what the right priorities are. And for a president of the United States and everybody who is a sworn official in the United States government, the first premise must be to serve and preserve the Constitution of the United States and the sovereignty of the people that that Constitution was meant to establish and secure. Biden is doing nothing of the kind. On every front, he is in fact overturning the Constitution. And this travesty of going to participate in something that's going to eventually be aimed at putting American people in an emergency that can be as phony as the one we just came through in terms of the suppression of everything that would have made us better. Therapies were suppressed and other things were done that were bound to kill people, and that was their intention. See? We have become, as a people, and that's why I don't know, why are we preoccupied with whether or not Putin is a communist, when the danger that's going to bring this country down is that all of Biden's cronies are communists. All of them are people who are dedicated to the ideology that casts aside the American Declaration. Obama could never quote it entirely. And that's because he did not think that its basic premise had any truth in it. And the basic premise of the American Declaration is God endowed unalienable right. A line drawn between right and wrong in all kinds of areas, but not drawn by human whim and not joined by the sufferance and suffrage of the people. That's why the Supreme Court just is trying to dangle in front of us something that, again, like the decision about not looking at the election, it makes me wonder how far this whole business has gone. It deeply disturbed me, to tell you the truth, to think that the justices who were on the Supreme Court, let's discount Roberts for a minute, though he was the source of, I think, that particular judgment, his browbeating from what I've read. I'm only depending on that. But I think I saw a pretty good chance that they would see their duty, because they were supposed to be strict constructionists. And what is a strict constructionist? Well, they like to go all hither and I just think a strict constructionist is somebody who reads the Constitution, doesn't make up something and then try to find some words in the Constitution that vaguely resemble what they would like to see, which is what's been going on for years. And there are explicit words in the Constitution about this. Okay, the United States. And in that phrase, one encompasses the United States government, yes? But when you say it without the government after it, you are also talking about every single state in the Union. The United States shall guarantee a Republican form of government in each of the states. Whose responsibility is it to notice when a Republican form of government is being damaged and overthrown and do something about it? It is the responsibility of every state. It is the responsibility of every government official sworn to uphold the Constitution. It is the responsibility of the Supreme Court, and they ignored their responsibility. And they actually acted as if the states, who are mandated by those words to be concerned to preserve the Republican form, had no interest in it. Now, why did I say that you have to be concerned when an election has no integrity? Because there are only two major components of the Republican form of government, according to the founders, established in the Constitution of the United States. Two things you've got to have: representation and elections. And it boiled down, in their minds, to making sure the elections happened often enough that you were really able to keep the government under some control. Everybody going into the government would have to stand the test of scrutiny, some of them every couple of years, the major ones like the president also periodically, right? So what was happening in 2020? They discarded the key premise, because you can't get representation if you don't have real elections, because the result doesn't represent your will. And off goes the Supreme Court, see? But Biden has been taking it further. And he's been now coming forward with proposals. Leave aside all the things that he hasn't done. The things that he is doing are things that utterly gut constitutional mandates. And what he's trying to do at the WHO, can somebody explain to me? I've looked at the Constitution a lot, and not just lately, for pretty much my whole lifetime, as an adult anyway. And you read through the Constitution, and I don't remember where it delegates the concern with health. I don't remember where it delegates that to the national government. Do you? I can't find it in there. Can you find it? I never found it in there. They delegate all kinds of powers that are needed to preserve the whole, but they don't delegate things like, well, how you deal with your health, how you deal with your families, and so forth and so on, because those are things either taken care of by the reserved power of the states or the powers reserved to the people. They don't belong to the President of the United States. He can't go to the WHO and negotiate them away, and we must make sure that the process is followed, required by the Constitution, because he may try to do something that doesn't bring the Senate into it. And if he does, he will then try to pretend that this utterly unlawful treaty, trying to abrogate from the control of the people and their representatives the power to deal with health emergencies, and instead turn it to the communist, Chinese-dominated WHO, we're supposed to miss the import of that? And if you can do that, you can do other things. And the one thing they will do eventually, which I think is the whole abortion issue in its reality. See, for the ideologues, the abortion issue isn't about all this that they're doing to lure women into thinking, this is our right, this is what, we can't live without this. Without abortion rights, women cannot be free. I heard at Notre Dame when I was there, sort of supporting the other side, this is what ladies were chanting. And I'm thinking to myself, what have we come to? Because what they're essentially saying is without being suffered in the power to murder our offspring, we can't be free. We can't be free without murder? Where have we gotten to? But there was a little flimsy ground in the Roe decision that let Blackmun sidestep the fact that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. That's done in the Fifth Amendment, as I recall, and it's done later on in the 14th Amendment. And in both cases, it is meant to deal with the fact that sometimes somebody's going to come along and they're going to say that people aren't persons, and therefore we can abuse them, therefore we can enslave them, therefore we can kill them. And that's what's going on right now. What has that danger? The danger that, as an extension of the abortion mentality, they're already doing it in California. As I have said for years, outside the womb, they want to allow 28 days the mother can kill. Nobody has ever denied the personhood of the infant outside the womb. They shouldn't have denied inside. And our science today refutes the notion that there is any question. That's not just a blob of cells. It's not even just a blob of human cells. It is a distinct individual, and we can identify that distinction as plainly as your distinction and my distinction are now identified for purposes in court. That's a person. And right now they're telling us that since the court gave them this so-called right, they're going to keep it, because without abortion rights, they can't be free. They can't be free unless the babies are killed. And outside the womb, that's what they're trying to get to. Why would they be trying to get outside the womb? Well, once you make it clear that a person can be killed, that there is no unalienable right to life. See, that's the meaning of unalienable, means you don't get to trample on that one. You don't get to trample on it in the case of the national government. You don't get to trample on it in any state government. You don't get to trample on it as the majority of the people in any state. The unalienable right is guaranteed not by human whim, but by God. And as Americans, we have enjoyed that guarantee. Unless we do something wrong, clearly wrong, under a law that does not just apply to us, but to everyone, our unalienable right to live, when abridged by murder, is just that, murder. And they are now setting us up so that if you get the backing of a majority, you can exterminate a person. How many people do you think they want to exterminate? See, that's why I think that all the things that were said here about being very wary of Putin And you must be wary of the communist Chinese. Do you think mass murderers just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm not a mass murderer anymore. I'm going to stop all that mass murdering stuff? Well, I can't say the record at the moment bears the judgment that Putin has stopped his predilection to go around killing people when they get in his way. Has he done it on a massive scale? Well, that depends on who you talk to. I know the communist Chinese have, on a massive scale. I know that the old USSR, on a massive scale. And of course, we all know about the Nazis and fascists and all of those people. In the United States, that's not only never supposed to happen under the Constitution, it shouldn't happen at all. The only people who a government can move against to kill them are people who by due process have been found guilty of violating a law common to everybody. And the whim of a woman that says, oh, I don't want this right now, I don't want the inconvenience, I don't want this, I don't want that, that doesn't constitute a law. A matter of fact, as it violates the laws of nature and of nature's God, it violates the very premise of our authority as ordinary folks who have nonetheless, despite all the opposition of just about every philosopher in human history, we have acquired sovereign power over our nation. And it has then performed in a way that outperformed every other nation in the history of the world, proving that when you unlock the key to human individual potential in a context of an ethos that allows all human beings to be treated with respect so that the aim is not to dominate but to work with, you get a result like nothing the world has seen before. A result that is now quickly evaporating. My final statement would simply be say, well, you were supposed to talk about Putin. I just did. See, because I think we need to put Putin in his place. His place right now is over there conducting a war. Surely we should condemn that sort of unilateral intervention, but we should do it in the old-fashioned way. And we should have done that from the beginning. Go to the United Nations, make it clear this is an utter violation of the Charter, call on all nations of the world to join us in combating this, and so forth and so on. And also, the other thing everybody forgets, because they think the war has to be over the Ukraine. No. The war we must make sure we're ready to fight. And we won't be ready if we squander all our military, both élan and material, in the Ukraine, is the war for the countries that decided to join NATO and did it for the right reasons, at the right time, in the right place, not after long-standing hesitancy about everything it represents. Okay? And I'm not saying that just about the Ukraine. Final point about the Ukraine, though, which is the other side of it, because nobody seems to focus much on it. I'd like to see a good analysis of the Ukrainian government, not just Zelensky, but the whole history of the Ukrainian government as it has been since it parted from the Soviets, ostensibly. Because part of my belief, somewhere in the back of my mind, that we must always keep in mind the possibility of a feigned retreat. What nation played a disproportionate role in the leadership of communism in the second half of the 20th century, those years before the USSR broke apart? Go take a look. From Khrushchev on, people from the Ukraine, or raised in the Ukraine, Khrushchev was raised there, take a look, were a part, and not just a small part, but a big part of the administration of the Soviet leadership. Isn't that special? Now, come on. If we can imagine the possibility that China and Russia go into the back room to work out an arrangement that might be detrimental to the United States because it helps us to target them in ways that will ultimately destroy them, why do you not think that it's possible that the Ukrainian plutocrats, and who were also, by the way, a lot of them not renowned for their deep hatred of communism during the USSR period, not at all, not even their deep hatred of Nazism during the Nazi period. Don't try to pretend to me that these are babes in the woods, because I am revolted by the fact that they have not only adopted the separation of church and state, they've adopted the killing of babies in the womb just like the rest of Europe. See, that raises a problem. We have problem children in Europe. I would happen to think that we have problem children in Europe because they have stepped away from the understanding that underlies representative government. And they don't really care about it. Never did a lot of the elites. So they're perfectly happy to see the world go back to the many and the few, with the few ruling and the many crushed. See? Tell me that that's not the situation in the Ukraine, because you've looked at it long and hard and know that though it looks like a plutocracy, something else is going on. Though it looks like the many, raking in the cash, it's something else. I can't make excuses for them any more than I'm willing to make them for Putin. And we shouldn't be that committed and concerned that we think anything over there is a substitute for winning the war that will lose everything. We are not winning it right this minute. America is falling. The Constitution is being turned into a dead letter. The Declaration is hidden in a dark cabinet somewhere so that people will not remember that their rights don't come from government. They come from God, and that unalienable rights can't be surrendered, even during a state of emergency. Not to the WHO and not to any human power, because our liberty in the responsible obligation represented by those rights requires that we pay first attention to God Almighty. This is why they hate him. And this is why, at the end of the day, I am more suspicious of the American elites in respect of the founding premise of God's authority that this country relies on. That keeps me awake at night. The question of whether Putin is a Christian, I will leave to God.